You throw another moon at me, and I'm gonna lose it. Stark.
Hi and welcome back. You made it through the first video. You came up with characters that people are actually going to care about, and now it's time to put them in a situation worth telling a story about. This is called conflict, and we're going to look at 7 different types of conflict that you can use to write a great story. And we're going to start by looking at Thanos, because he is one of the most memorable villains of our generation. While Marvel's on top right now, I would be remiss if I didn't bring up The Dark Knight and Joker. Because pre-Thanos and pre these Marvel movies being the best superhero movies out there, there was a series of 3 Batman movies directed by Christopher Nolan that were just incredible. And the second one, that had the villain the Joker, was just great. Everybody said it was great. IMDb rates this movie the 4th best movie of all time, and it all comes down to a great villain, the Joker. But now DC is kind of failing, and they have to go back and remake the entire Justice League movie because they dropped the ball the first time around. This comes down to the villain. They're like, okay, there's this guy Steppenwolf, and he comes and he destroys entire planets. And we're like, why? Because that's what he does. And we're like, why? And they're like, I don't know, he's a planet destroyer. But that why is something that we can't skip.
Because you murdered half the planet.
A small price to pay for salvation.
It's too important to look over. And so when Thanos is trying to wipe out half of the world's population, he tells us why.
This universe is finite, its resources finite. If life is left unchecked, life will cease to exist.
And so creating a great villain is one of the 7 types of conflict that will make an amazing story if you write your villain correctly. And here's just a quick few tips off the top of my head. Give your villain some power, tell them why they're doing what they're doing, but also give your villain some wins, because if your villain is always losing, like Megamind at the beginning of the movie Megamind, you're not going to take this villain seriously. But if they get wins, like Thanos does succeed in getting everything he needs to wipe out half of the world's population, might be half of the universe's population, if they get those wins, it makes them all the more dangerous. And the more dangerous your villain is, the more triumphant it is when the protagonist comes along and succeeds in overtaking them. When you're writing a story that has a clear villain, you already know what protagonist means. The villain is called the antagonist. They're the bad guy. They're the one who's against the person that you're rooting for. They're a person that puts obstacles in the way and makes it harder for the protagonist to reach the goal that they're trying to reach. But not every story has an antagonist. There's 6 more types of conflict that we're going to explore right now. Maybe there's no one clear villain, and we can have protagonist versus society. This, like in the Hunger Games, is when the society is embracing something that the protagonist is against. So in the case of Hunger Games, Katniss Everdeen is thrust into this thing called Hunger Games that she doesn't want to do. But the entire society that's in control is embracing this, and so she has to go and cause change in that entire society. There's no one bad guy. We could argue that President Snow might be that one bad guy, but really it's having to change an entire viewpoint of an entire society, and that's a tall order. That's why you get 4 movies, 3 books for this series. Maybe your protagonist is going against nature. In Protagonist versus Nature, think Jurassic Park on this one. There's no bad guy, but there's a lot of dinosaurs trying to eat the people. And so this is nature. Now, I grew up watching movies in the 90s and early 2000s, and there's no shortage of natural disaster movies that could fit into this. Day After Tomorrow, Deep Blue Sea, Dante's Peak, Twister, 2021. I could go on and on. We have a genre called person versus supernatural. This is a conflict that involves vampires and ghosts and werewolves, and the best example for this is the show Supernatural. We could also think Ghostbusters. This is when the protagonist is trying to take on some otherworldly force. Again, we have ghosts, vampires, demons, that whole genre of thing. Another one we can look at is called protagonist versus technology. And Terminator is a great example of that. It blows my mind that some people don't like the movie The Matrix because I think it's amazing, but this is a great example of protagonist versus technology. This technological force is coming to take over the world. And the last two are a little more difficult to do on their own, but they show up a lot within other conflicts, and that's person versus fate and person versus themselves. So while there's other conflicts happening, person versus self is when the person is having an internal struggle. Do I do this or do I do that? Think of the angel and the devil on the shoulders. And in that case, the person is trying to decide what they have to do. Usually, it comes down to, do they benefit everybody else or do they benefit themselves? A great example of this, which I already brought up in the last video, is in the last Avengers movie, Tony Stark has to decide, does he live a happy life with his family, in which he will be happy, or does he embark on the mission to help save half of the universe? And spoiler alert, he ends up dying, and so he sacrifices himself to make sure that everybody else in the universe has an opportunity to be happy. That's an internal struggle. And finally, we have person versus fate, or protagonist versus fate, their own fate. And this one, again, happens within other larger conflicts. So on this one, I'm thinking of The Lion King. Simba, it's his fate to become the king of the jungle. It's his fate to rule Pride Rock. But that's within the larger struggle of the hero and villain story of Simba and Scar. You're going to use the information I just gave you previously in the video to list all 7 types of conflict. Protagonist verse 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7, and fill that in the boxes on this slide. After that, it comes down to opinion. Now, we all have things that we're into and we all have things that we're not really into. So if you're one of these people who doesn't really like sci-fi, you perhaps don't like the movie Matrix, and you're deciding, I'm not really interested in the protagonist versus technology conflict, that's one you're going to rule out. You're going to rule out 4 different conflicts. After you've ruled out those 4 conflicts, you're going to be left with 3 conflicts. I want you to fill those in the boxes on this slide. And once you've done that, I want you to search the internet, search your brain, search wherever you have to search, talk to your friends, and come up with 3 pieces of media, one that matches each of the 3 types of conflict that you have left. And don't use the examples that I've given you, but say, for example, you have chosen person versus nature. Go find a book that is about person versus nature. Go find a movie. Go find a TV show. Find something that is or that shows a conflict of person versus nature, and then add a picture of that to this slide. Do that, 1 piece of media each for each of the 3 types of conflict that you have left. And now we are gearing up with a story worth telling. But there's one more thing that we need to consider before we start coming up with the different parts of what happened in that story. So we'll see you in the next video where we talk about that.